Hello, my name is Andy and I am the Village Idiot. I'm armed with a car and a GoPro and an unhealthy amount of time on my hands. I'm using that time to attempt to visit every civil parish in England. You're watching the East Riding of Yorkshire series. Together with the unparished city of Hull, it forms the county of the same name. There's 172 parishes here. Which one are we in today? Welcome back to the East Riding of Yorkshire, everybody, and once again we're on the East Yorkshire Wolds. Welcome as well to the highest point of the East Yorkshire Wolds. This is Huggate. Here's my disclaimer for people who may be watching me for the first time. I say things as I would in my native accent and dialect. As a result, I may not pronounce things in the same way as the locals do. Remember, I'm a visitor. It's impossible to know everything. Leave me a comment, spin me a like and bash that subscribe button. Let's get to today's parish video. We're on the High Wolds again, folks. Welcome to Huggate, which lies between Pocklington and Driffield. Despite actually sitting in a hollow, this is the highest village on the East Yorkshire Wolds at around 558 feet above sea level. It's popular with walkers as its highest points give fabulous views. This is a village containing a Grade 1 listed church, one of the deepest wells in England at 116 yards deep, which supplied the village with water, and a well-renowned local hostelry called the Wolds Inn. The name Huggate is possibly derived from the Old Norse words haugr and gata, which in modern English would mean the road near the mounds. That would make a lot of sense. However, none can be quite like the Huggate Dikes, a series of medieval boundary mounds which are long and thin, running across the hills towards Fridaythorpe. Northwest of the village is Huggate Wold. In the early 1940s, it was surveyed for a bomber base and building nearly went ahead, but a better location was found at what would become RAF Full Sutton. However, in 1943, the RAF created an airstrip for testing on Huggate Wold made from steel mesh, and it was used by two RAF squadrons, 168 and 170. There's much more to tell, so let's get to it, shall we? Our route begins at the Church of St Mary at Huggate's northern end. This was formerly dedicated to All Saints or All Hallows. In the churchyard we have the village's war memorial, known as the Huggate Obelisk. There are 10 names on this, 9 from World War I and 1 from World War II. The church dates from at least the 12th century, as records show it was given by Fawn, son of Sigulf, to St Mary's Abbey in York in about 1150. Inside there are tablets to members of the Wilkinson family, including Reverend John Wilkinson, who had connections to Nunbanome and Killick Percy. St Mary's was fully restored in 1864. It features 2 windows at the eastern end of its nave, which are Norman, but not in original situ. Its chancel arch and nave are 13th century, and its tower and massive stone spire, which can be seen for miles around, date from 1340. Beautiful church, that one, and I imagine the village is just as beautiful as its church. So let's have a wander through it. It's generally speaking a linear place, although I can turn it into a kind of a circle. The next thing we're looking at is an old school. This old school is just one of 3 known to have existed in the village. Dating from the late 1800s, Huggate School closed in 1959. The man in the yellow jacket in this shot is one of its former pupils. I got chatting to him for a short while later on, and he told me loads about the village. Walking down Church Street, we pass this little shelter, similar to the one we found in Nunbanome, albeit a little less crammed full. There's a parish notice board in here though, and that's another one in the East Riding of Yorkshire ticked off our list. The shelter is located near the village green at the point where Church Street becomes Stocks Hill, a name which suggests Huggate may well have had a set of stocks in the past. The green features a children's playground. According to Huggate Parish Council's website, a primitive Methodist chapel stood somewhere here in 1840. Okay, now we're hitting the main road that runs through the village, and there's a sign here. I've been looking forward to saying this word, or the name of this village should I say. We're only 4 miles away from Wet Wang. On Pocklington Lane is Plum Tree Studio. This is an art gallery run by local artist Belinda Hazelrig, who draws and paints the beautiful local scenery. Printmaking workshops are also run in her studio. A bit further up the road, we find Rachel's Walnut Cottage Tea Rooms, popular with cyclists. It was closed for Christmas here, but when it's open, it's a warm, cosy traditional tea room and coffee shop with a huge choice of delicious homemade cakes. Now we go the other way along Driffield Road. Here's a former Wesleyan Methodist chapel, which was built in around 1886. Next we have Huggate's pub, the Wolds Inn, which has been serving the locals here since the 18th century. It has a claim to fame too. It's perhaps best known for being the first pub in which David Hockney, the famous Yorkshire artist, ever got drunk. There's more on him next week. Okay, at this point it looks like you're leaving civilization, and sort of you are. There's a couple of farms on the right hand side, and on the other side you've got a nice view into the Wolds, and somewhere across that land there's a footpath which will take us back into the village so I can complete this circuit. The last section of the walk takes us back to Silver Street and the other side of the village green via a permissive and then a public footpath. This path crosses this bumpy field, which I was absolutely convinced was a patch of earthworks, as it shows all the classic earthwork signs. However, I came up empty on this, because surprisingly there doesn't seem to be anything about this field out there. Perhaps these are earthworks which have never been explored. Whatever the case, we're now on Silver Street at the other side of the playground. This is where we find not just one, but 2 ponds. One is considerably larger than the other. This is the smaller of the 2, tucked away in a corner, and both were frozen over. The man I met earlier told me that the larger pond was almost like a free skating rink for Huggate's residents when it was frozen. And speaking of him, I was to encounter him again just here. So the guy I was talking about earlier, he's obviously lives there. There he is. He's still talking to some other guys who've just come across him, telling him all little stories. One of those guys recognised me as well. Anyway, here is the other pond, very much frozen over. I can't ice skate, so I'm not about to have a go on there, quite frankly. But yeah, that's the other pond here in Huggate. Got to this corner here, and I didn't realise I was actually walking on the water because the path, I couldn't see it. And it sort of stops there, and here is this bit's water. It's frozen. So I'm glad it's thick ice, enough to take my weight. To the north of the village, on the road to Fridaythorpe, you'll find the Huggate Dikes, if you know where to go, that is. They lie on Huggate pasture and form part of a large series of prehistoric banks and ditches that can be found across the East Yorkshire Wolds. Cumulatively, these earthwork features stretch across 80 to 100 miles of the high ground of the Wolds, although many have been ploughed away and are now only recorded as crop marks. What their purpose was is not fully known, although it would seem unlikely that their relatively low height gave them much of a defensive role. It's much more probable that they formed a series of territorial boundaries between different family or tribal groups. It's believed the Huggate Dikes date back to the Bronze Age or possibly even before. Iron Age pottery was recovered from a ditch section during excavation of the site in the 1970s. And now we've come full circle and we're back to the church and the school. Now, something that the guy who I was talking to told me about the school was that when this closed, all the children, pupils, students, whatever you want to call them, were bused to the next village so that they can continue their education. And that village is where we're going next. For now though, this has been the parish of Huggate, and I've been Andy, also known as the Village Idiot, and I'm out.